Okay, welcome back. We're on page 12 talking about the components of, so we talked about the C for confidentiality, I for integrity, and now we're on A for availability. So for availability, you want to be able to provide access to someone without having them to go through hoops. I mean, for example, if every single time I wanted to look at something, it asked me for my, mother's maiden name and shoe size and all this stuff every single time, and there was no way for me to like save any of that stuff. I would get rather annoyed. Um, so typically, availability is the one that's almost always at odds with the other two, particularly the confidentiality part. If you're really big on confidentiality, then availability is going to be suffer. For example, let's say you have some super duper top secret stuff. If you want to go look at it, you're probably going to have to get off your chair, walk down the hall, go to a secure facility, sit at a secure computer, and get the data. You can get it, but they're going to make you work for it. You can't do it from your desk. See what we're talking about? So when confidentiality is really high, availability suffers. Yes. Okay, accuracy. So we've left the CIA triangle. Now we're moving on. So free of mistakes or errors. Now, so it could be that you're gathering data. I don't know, you're gathering weather data, okay? And you're looking at thermostat settings in Central Texas, and you're seeing 94 and 92 and 789. You go, whoa. That kind of stuff? Okay. It also could be timely data. Um, how old is the data? Is it still accurate? I mean, for example, if you told me, well, here's the temperature data, but it was 6 hours old, that's not very useful to me at all, is it? If I want to know if it's cold outside or hot outside, right? Okay. And then you have the thing called cumulative accuracy. Let's say you're doing some math on a piece of data, like you have the temperature and the humidity, and you're trying to come up with the feels like temperature. Okay. So, but if you have 95% confidence on this one and 95% confidence on that one, when you get to here, you're going to multiply the confidence levels. So 95% of 95%, which is going to be like 90 something. So accuracy actually drops down when you start using these things in math. Okay. So if you have a 50% confidence in one of the variables in some equation, then the resulting number is never going to be above 50, right? Okay, good. Authenticity. So is there a reasonable assurance that you know who sent the thing? Okay. And so digital signatures are often used for this. Email spoofing is just so incredibly easy to do. Every day, I log into my email, and there's always something about, oh man, your payment didn't go through, click here. And it's like, I look at the domain name and I go, that doesn't represent the company at all. Just delete, move on. You know, a lot of people have come up and said, we could solve this by issuing everyone basically a digital certificate that was unique in the world. And that way, every time you sent an email to grandma would know immediately that it came from you. Now, the problem with that is privacy people went ape, going, oh my God, there's no way you could do anything anonymously anymore. And it's like, yeah, that's the problem we're trying to solve, is that people misrepresent themselves when they send an email to me. I want that problem solved. Well, you can't solve that problem without having a privacy issue. So we never got around to doing it, although that would solve the problem. Everyone who had an email address would be issued, a security certificate, and that would solve the problem. Utility. Is the data still relevant? Again, in espionage, if it takes 2 weeks to decrypt a message, and the message says, when you finally do, meet me at the park tomorrow. It took me 2 weeks to decrypt it, and now it's useless because I wasn't there at the park because I didn't know it in time. That kind of stuff. Or it could just be completely overwhelming, the amount of data that you have. And so the utility of the data is like, oh, I got too much data. I don't know what to do with. I will tell you that sometimes that comes to your advantage. For example, the story about Enigma in World War II. Maybe you've even seen the goofy movie on the Turing effect. But anyway, at the end of every message, it was almost always, Hail Hitler. And so they knew that the last part of the message was going to be a phrase that was every single time. And they kind of use that to kind of, shorten up the decryption routine. Possession, that means, who has it or can get it, right? Ownership or control. So theft of company data means loss of, possession, okay? And by the way, let's talk about part of the problem with piracy. Before piracy became a big thing, if somebody stole your car was no longer there in the driveway. It was obvious. But when someone steals a file, they make a copy of it, and you are not lost possession. So one of the early tenets of law was, did you lose possession or the ability to use something? And if the answer is no, it was like, go away. Okay, well, things have changed. So that whole thing. So theft of data is now controlled by a different set of laws. Okay. So they talk about the CNS Committee on National Security. They have this really cool thing. Basically, it's a combination of what we just talked about: the confidentiality, integrity, and availability, storage, processing, and transmission. So this is where things leak, encrypt, and then policy, education, and technology. It's kind of a cube. And I kind of like this because it talks about all things. It talks about, the CIA triangle. It talks about, data at rest, data in flight, data in use, plus policy, education, and technology that you could throw at something. Anyway, a three-dimensional approach is pretty cool. Okay, so on page 15, they talk about the components of an IES. Now, this is important because, quite frankly, we're going to have an assignment that deals with these guys. Okay, so 6 components. People, hardware, software, networks, data, and process. I guess, is that 6? Yeah, it's 6. Okay, cool. So please do pay attention to this part because, you're going to have something. So let's just talk about the first one, software. So we're talking about operating system and, applications. And so patch management. You guys are probably aware that, Microsoft has a Patch Tuesday, where they release patches for the operating system. But hey, let me ask you a question. So does that mean that my other software that's not written by Microsoft, maybe I have some Adobe or Apple products or whatever, I have some other things on my machine, does that mean they get patched at the same time with Microsoft patches? No, Microsoft patches are only for Microsoft products. They don't go and patch, Adobe products. Okay. Now, I will tell you that an awful lot of the other companies have kind of joined hands and decided that Patch Tuesday was also going to be the day that they release patches, but not all of them, and it's not consistent. Okay. So how do you manage all of your installed software? I mean, if you're at home, you probably don't care, right? You might just go over and every once in a while you go, wow, let me go to apps here and, go see what we got. And, that's good enough. I don't need anything else. Okay, great. Yeah, but in a corporate environment, you probably need a database that contains all this stuff, right? And how do you update everything? Well, that's a little bit more complicated because I told you Microsoft only does part of it. So I'm going to run a cool utility called Update Hub. So I'm just going to type update to get this. Now, the very first time you run this guy, it basically says, I need to go get my data and do a scan. So now this is kind of weird. It's just going to tell me every piece of software that is not up to current. It does not mean that there's a security violation involved. For example, I like, WinZip. And so I'm at WinZip 14.5. Then it comes up and says, the latest one is 14.6. And I go, yeah, but I don't care. You see what I'm saying? So this just basically tells me the teams and this and this and this are kind of out of the date. All right. That does not mean that there's a problem, but this is a cool technique that'll go through and find all of your applications, not just Microsoft, guys. And if you pay, you can even have it so when you hit an update button, it'll actually go and get stuff and do the thing. I mean, it's a pretty cool tool. I actually recommend it. Okay, let me continue. So hardware. So historically, hardware has been immune, pretty much. I mean, yeah, there was a floating point division problem in Intel CPUs a million years ago, but now there's a lot more. There's some chip vulnerabilities now associated with hyper-threading, Spectre and Meltdown, where either they could have two processes could see each other's data, or a process could, it's called speculative execution. If there's like an if statement in an application, the machine doesn't stop to wait to see. It actually starts working on both sides, the yes and the no side. And if the answer is yes, well, then the no side still has data in it. And so you could be reading some stuff. Anyway, so I'm not going into technical details now, but there was this, Spectre and Meltdown if you ever want to read up about it. So hardware typically was talking about physical security. Like I left my laptop in the back of a cab. I remember seeing this episode of some show. I don't even remember what show it was. And they talked about the New York Transit Authority lost and found. And they were just rows and rows and rows of laptops, waiting for someone to call and say, I lost my laptop. Yeah, it's left at the airport, left it in the backseat of a cab, those kind of things. Data. So data, typically we need protection. That kind of makes sense. It could be paper, it could be electronic, it could be databases, right? And so encryption is typically the way you do this, typically. And then people. Okay, people, those pesky humans. One of the phrases we used to use about security is, if all those dang people would go away, our job would sure be an awful lot easier. So an apathetic computer. Ignorance and apathy. That's a phrase you're going to hear a lot. Ignorance and apathy. Yeah, I know I'm supposed to do something, and I didn't do it. Yeah, that kind of goes back to the thing about, me beating them up over the head about finding Social Security numbers in paper in the dumpsters. I couldn't solve the problem. I couldn't beat them hard enough. Disgruntled employees, ooh, boy, that's a rough one, because they probably already have access to something. So they're not breaking in. They have legitimate access, but they're pissed. And so they're going to release it to your competitors. That's a tough one. And remember now, in my opinion, you may disagree, but in my opinion, humans are the weakest link. Disgruntled employee is rough, and there's practically nothing. Well, that's not true. It's very, very difficult to protect against that. So the Great Wall of China, everybody knows that. So they spent, years and years and years building this gargantuan thick talk. And then rumor has it, this is probably not true, but it's a good story nevertheless. So this Mongol chief, bribed the gate guard, and they drove right on through. It's like, you mean I spent, millions and millions of dollars, and all it took was $100 bribe, and my $1 million worth of protection was useless? Yeah. Remember, people are the weakest link. Okay. So how do you protect against social engineering things? Somebody comes up with a ladder and a tool belt saying, hey, let me in the server room. I need to change the light bulbs. And you go, okay. So how do you protect against that? Because the guy really wasn't. He was, he was installing keyloggers onto the servers, that kind of stuff. Okay, so policy, education, and training and awareness, we're going to spend an entire chapter on that. So I'm just going to breeze over it right now. And technology has a relatively minor role in social protection against social engineering. It's almost always education and policy and training. Okay, we're coming up on the 15-minute mark again. So I'll see you again in the next part.